Good morning. So for those who don't know, I happen to run the AV stuff that you see behind us in between when I preach and when I don't preach. And so my pattern for the last however long it's been is when the communion thing starts, I do the bread, do the fruit of the vine, and then I run down from the AV and then go back along the hallway and then listen to the door to see when the prayer's over and then come out here to preach. That's my pattern. So good cardio for the day. I descended from the stairs, and Eddie's out there, posted up his guard, and he said, "Were you wearing a tie?" I go, "Yeah, for Penny and Jane, of course. They get their annual once-a-year tie that I wear just for them. So I want to make sure to call them out to embarrass them before I do anything else." So anyway, it's been a weird time with COVID, right? It's been almost a full year of us having our lives kind of turned upside down, and for other folks, it's been a tragic event to have loss in their life, but for us, it's been a little inconvenient, right? Well, when this whole thing started, we went to one worship for a little while, and we took a long quarantine break, 11 weeks, and then we came back for one worship again. I've tried to keep some content coming out. What I mean is that if you are looking for resources to keep learning, when we're not having our normal assembled supplemental worship and study time, then something for you. And so I've been, believe it or not, doing classes on Wednesday nights or Wednesday afternoons at 3 o'clock for a year. So if you're looking for content and you're not aware that I'm doing that, that's there for you on Facebook and on YouTube and on my podcast. And the reason why I say that is because when we do eventually come back for regular Sunday morning Bible classes, I usually teach that, as I think I used to, if I remember that far. I'll be picking up where I left off on my Wednesday afternoon classes. And so what we're doing right now is talking about the life of David. He's one of my favorite people in the Bible. He's probably the high water mark of all the people we can think about. Moses and Elijah are up there, but David, he's talked about a lot in reference to being the one that came before Christ. And so we're going slowly through his life. My tendency is I want to just rush and get to all the good parts, but the stuff that's kind of in between is a little bit slower to kind of build the stage for us. I want to really slow down and take my time. And there's no one here anyway, so you can't stop me. I'm going to go as slow as I want. So the reason why I say all that is because if you don't know I'm doing that, I'm doing that. And if you want to be current when we eventually do come back for classes, you might want to catch up a little bit. But also, we covered two things in the past two classes that is just, classic David moments. And there's one that I didn't even know was a classic David moment until I read it for the first time. And I thought, this is in the Bible? And I've had a couple of moments like that where you just read something so ridiculous. And you're like, this is the Word of God, and he chose to include that detail? Like, how crazy is that? The first one is not that gross, but still a little funny. It's the fact that David is now on the run from King Saul. King Saul has greed or avarice or jealousy, whatever you want to call it, and he tries to kill David. Although David is now his son-in-law through marriage, he has gone out and killed a lot of Philistines for King Saul, and Saul's still trying to kill him. So the first place that David goes to really escape Saul is he leaves Israel and he goes to a place called Gath. And if you don't know, Gath is one of these main military cities in Philistia. So he's going to the enemy camp to try to get away from his king, which is a huge deal, right? He's leaving Israel's king, Israel's boundaries. He's going to the enemy territory to escape his own king. So a huge kind of dramatic moment. And when people realize, isn't this the guy that killed Goliath and killed all our Philistine army guys? Isn't this that guy David? He pretends to be insane, would be a polite way to say it. He opens his mouth and he slurs and he lets dribble fall from his mouth into his beard, which is the most polite way I can say it. So he pretends to be insane to escape the king, right? That's a pretty wild story. And the first time I read that, I was like, there's no way this is in the Bible. There's no way. This guy pretends to be insane by just kind of letting drool come down, and they're like, well, this guy's crazy. He can't be David. And so when I read that, I thought, there's an interesting way that David seems to do, it seems like the right thing, but I always wonder, where's his mindset? What's he thinking about? How does he feel? Like, I know what the events were. He's running from his own king that he went out to almost die for a couple times, and he's been betrayed by him, and his son Jonathan is trying to encourage him to flee for his life, but where's his mind? Well, thankfully, we have the book of Psalms, and there are a couple of Psalms here that have the title, and the title describes for us where he was when he wrote this psalm or song in praise to God. So this morning, let's begin in Psalm 56. This might be a part 1, part 2 deal. I didn't plan it that way, but here we are. Okay, Psalm 56. If we read the title here, depending on what translation you have, it's gonna look different than what I'm gonna read. Sometimes, like the King James, will just throw in the English version of the Hebrew name or word there because we don't really know what it means. Sometimes you have some translations that look at that Hebrew word and they try to translate it appropriately, so it might read different than what I'm going to read right now. But it says, "To the choir master, according to the dove on far-off terebinths," which we think is like a song that they would have had the music to, and these words are going to be kind of played over that music. A miktam of David, that's the Hebrew. We don't really know what that is. Could be a song, could be a feast song, could be a sorrow song. We don't really know historically. When the Philistines seized him in Gath. And so if you're looking and you have a Bible where you can kind of tap a little thing, this will take you to the chapter in 1 Samuel 22 where he pretends to be a crazy person to escape the king of Gath. So we kind of know what we're going to read is based on the events that he went through when that whole story was going down, which is so helpful because now we have depth. When we have just an event, we have things that were said, decisions that were made, a historical record of things that were done, but now we have kind of the poetry behind all of that motion. So you kind of get an idea of what he's thinking about when he's going through all of that. Okay, Psalm 56, verse 1. "Be gracious to me, O God, because man tramples on me. All day long, an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long because many attack me proudly." So if you want to know where the mind or heart of David is when he's trying to run from his king to the enemy's camp to escape persecution and judgment, he says, I'm being attacked by everybody. That's where his mind's at. Verse 3 rather. "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me?" Now, that's a quote from the New Testament, obviously. It's used again in the New Testament. But the original words were in light of David running from his king, running from his army, running to the Philistines that he was in combat with. He's saying here in verse 3, I'm afraid. I mean, obviously, but it just helps us to know that David, of all people, is just like us. He feels like he's being attacked by everybody, and he is afraid. And when he is afraid, he goes to God, who he knows is more powerful. You kind of see what we're doing here? We can read 1 Samuel and get the events, but this gives us what he was feeling in that moment. Verse 5, "All day long they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil." Now, don't miss the fact that we got a little bit of hyperbole here, right? For good reason. He's exaggerating for effect. So again, verse 1, "Man tramples me. All day long an attacker oppresses me." Verse 2, "All day long they trample on me." And then verse 5, "All day long they injure my cause." He's saying here, Everyone's always against me. Have you ever had a moment where you feel like that's true? Everything has gone wrong today. Everybody I met was just so rude to me. Is that literal? No, not really literal, but you feel that way, don't you? It's emotion. That's part of the human experience, right? David felt that. He goes, I feel like all day long, every day, everyone's against me but God. Verse 6. They stir up strife. They lurk. They're waiting for me. They watch my steps. Well, literally, they did. We had people ratting David out no matter where he went in Israel. As they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape? In wrath cast down the peoples, O God. He's saying, listen, they're not going to get away with this. I've done nothing wrong. God's justice is going to reign supreme. Now, the reason why we mention that here specifically is because that gave him comfort. That gave him solace to know that although he's innocent and there are people trying to kill him for no offense, he knows that God is just. And knowing that gave him the strength to say, no matter what man can do to me, God is still in control. Now I love verse 8. You have kept count of my tossings. What's a tossing? Well, the idea here is that he can't rest. He can't get comfortable. He can't be at peace. Have you ever had a night where you just can't lie in your bed and just go to sleep? You toss and you turn because something is bothering you. That's what David's talking about here. Every time I toss and I fret and I'm anxious and I'm afraid, you keep count. You know about those things. You put my tears in your bottle. I think about that verse a lot. Going through this life, living this experience, this finite physical existence, we face so much. Joy, happiness, peace, sorrow, depression, anxiety. Both of those spectrums in our life. It comforts me to know that David was thinking about God, and he's saying, every time I wept, you kept track of how many tears I dropped. That's how intimate David thought God was. Are they not in your book? Verse 9, then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? Seems almost like he may be trying to convince himself that that's true. I have a high regard and respect for David. The decisions that he made were not perfect, but they were godly for the most part. If he's got to repeat himself that I'm not going to be afraid, because what can man do to me? And he repeats that twice. It seems like either that's absolutely true in his mind, or he's trying to convince himself that's where his mind should be. Verse 12, I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you, because you've delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. Now in this psalm, in reflection to going to the Philistine camp, their city, their stronghold, to escape King Saul's wrath and jealousy, we see him being full of fear, feeling like everyone's out to get him all the time, but ultimately he ends in the idea that he wants to walk with God through the light of life. He wants to keep living. He wants to praise God. He wants to give thanks. And he wants his enemies to fall, which is a righteous thing. And so in this particular psalm, you see this particular event, and you see his emotion behind it. Now, let's go to Psalm 57. This is not going to be a part 1, part 2. This one's shorter, so stay with me. After he pretended to be an insane person in Gath, he went to a cave in Adullam. And in this cave, he had some friends with him. They were vagabonds. They were not the best caliber of men, one might say, but they were with him. So he wasn't alone, which is good. Being alone is not a good thing for anyone to be. When he's in this cave, King Saul had to use the bathroom. Again, can you believe that's in the Bible? I mean, it's a human thing, but it's the Word of God. We've gone through thousands of years now, almost 3,000 years of people, scribes, translating this and writing it over and over and over and over again, and they had to use the bathroom. That's what's so important. All that work for bathroom talk. Anyway, so King Saul goes in there to use the bathroom, and David sneaks up on him and cuts off the end of his robe as proof that he could have killed Saul, but he didn't. I talk more about the meaning behind that or the implications from that in my class you can watch if you want. But here we find this particular psalm in reference to that event. Interesting. Here's the title. To the choir master, according to Do Not Destroy, which, I mean, just sounds like metal to me, but they didn't have metal back then, so I'm not sure what kind of song that would have been. But I just think of heavy drums and guitar riffs, but that's just me. A miktam of David when he fled from Saul in the cave, so in the cave of Adullam. Verse 1. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. So again, sounds like a metal song to me, but what do I know? So in this first verse, he's not like triumphant that because King Saul is here yet and I've cut off his robe and I'm going to live. He's still in a cave fleeing from his own king, right? Whenever you find someone going in a cave, either to bury somebody or because something severe is going on the outside. So David in the cave is a huge deal. Verse 2, I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He will send heaven and save me. He will put to shame him who tramples on me. Now that word salah there you might have in your translation, we think it means rest, like a rest like for the downbeat or whatever back in the day, but we don't really know for sure. So just kind of be aware of that. The very first time I ever read a psalm out loud was for public speaking class in high school. I didn't know that quite yet, so I read the word salah every time. So don't do that. Okay, verse 4, or part B of 3. God will send out his steadfast love and faithfulness. My soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. So now we get a little idea of where he's at. He's saying, listen, I'm not just being surrounded by all these people. They're like ferocious, wild animals coming to kill me. That's what he feels like. He's in a cave, fleeing from his own army, his own king. He's afraid. Verse 5, be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my way, but they have fallen into it themselves. Now remember, if you don't, there is a moment before he goes into the cave where someone rats him out and says, hey, King Saul, by the way, the guy you're looking for, David's over on this mountainside. When he figures out that he's been ratted out, he then goes into the cave. And so then again, verse 6, they set a net for my steps. He knows that people are against him, going to the king, looking for a reward to kill this righteous man. Verse 7, my heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. I've never, ever, to my knowledge, been chased by someone, an enemy, or been so distressed by my events of my life that I'm like, I've got to sing to God. David felt that way. He says, listen, I'm in a cave, fleeing for my life. I still want to praise your name. Verse 8, awake, my glory. talking about God. Awake, O harp and lyre, I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations, because your steadfast love is great to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Weird. Weird. If you ask me, I mean, maybe he's right. I'm probably right. But weird. He is being chased down by the same people that were bothering him before. He's now in Adullam. He's in a cave. He asks for help, but at the end, he just kind of says, you know what? I'm going to praise you anyway. It reminds me exactly of the events of his life later, when he made the big mistake with Bathsheba, when he was busted for adultery, for fornication, for the murder of the husband. He has a baby on the way, and the Lord tells him the baby's not going to live because of the consequence of his fornication. He fasts, he prays, he sits in ashes and sackcloth. When he finally hears that the child's died, he cleans himself up, and what does he do? He goes to the temple and he praises God, despite the Lord allowing that consequence to continue. So for me, what I'm learning from these two Psalms, from the events that we've talked about in our Wednesday classes, David is someone who is human, he has emotion, and he goes to God through prayer and song to find comfort, to find respite, to find encouragement, to make it through those moments. And so my encouragement to myself and to you is that when we find ourselves in those emotional, heavy moments, learn from David, who is just as human as us, and seek refuge in the one who's above it all. If anyone has a need to respond this morning to the invitation, we've suffered a lot of loss and grief and sorrow recently. If you're someone that needs the encouragement that God can provide, allow us to help you by responding, by coming forward as we stand and we sing.